Well, greetings again, Tubaneros. Anyone familiar with the history of the West and America over the generations can't help but see certain parallels in the course of things. I would say they are more than mere parallels, but are continued expressions of the same thing over and over. A prime example is the so-called War on Terror, which is but a restatement of the white man's burden of the 19th century. Now I can hear the protests hitting the screen now as I speak. But Azov, think of all the progress and democracy and human rights, all the social movements of inclusion that have remade Western values since then. The current clash of civilizations is more than some simplistic race war. It's the struggle over the universals of humanity against inhumanity. In other words, let's go back even further to ancient Greece and Rome. The barbarians are once again at the gates of true civilization and culture. If they're not defeated, not just Greece and Rome are lost, but the entire human race goes down the aqueduct. Well, on May 18, 1905, President Theodore Roosevelt sent a personal letter to Chief No Shirt of the Walla Walla tribe, a resident of the Umatilla Reservation in the Blue Mountain region near Pendleton, Oregon. Here he was at the time. I guess this top was rented from the photographer for the occasion. Anyway, the chief had gone to Washington to complain personally to the Great White Father that all was not well on the reservation. Its management had filled the pipe of peace with dirty grass and oregano, so to speak. But after No Shirt had traveled all the way across North America and gone to the Great White House of GWF in person, Teddy Roosevelt refused to see him. It developed that the good chief hadn't gone through the proper channels. One just didn't drop in on the POTUS chief to chief as equals, no matter what the clauses of a rigged treaty. But after No Shirt hightailed it all the way back to Oregon, TR seemed to have a pang of conscience. His brusqueness might have alienated a colonial subject, giving yet another incidental cause for further dissatisfaction with the white man's mission. So to ease his spirit and reassure Chief No Shirt, Roosevelt sent him this personal communication on the Great White Father letterhead, which I will read from this book. When I open it to the right page, here we go. The earth is occupied by the white people and the red people. If the red people would prosper, they must follow the mode of life which has made the white people so strong. And that it is only right that the white people should show the red people what to do and how to live. I wish to be a father to the red people as to the white. Now, my friend, I hope you will lay what I have said to heart. Try to set your people a good example of upright and industrious life, patience under difficulties, and respect for the authority of the officers I have appointed. If you try as hard to help them as you do to find something in their conduct to censure, you will be surprised to find how much real satisfaction life holds in store for you. Well, that letter, over a century later, still sums up the American attitude to tribes or nations that go off the reservation. Yesterday it was Geronimo and the Apaches, and this generation it was Osama bin Laden and the Al-Qaedas. Now the ISIS tribe has put on war paint and gone off the Iraqi reservation, and it must be put in its place for the peace and plenty of the world. When we ask whose world, we're told, why, yours. But is it for us? No matter how it's repackaged, it's the same story of the wealthy white owners of the West imposing themselves upon the lesser nations of the earth to control their geography and resources and keep them subdued by Christianity or democracy or the rule of law, which in practice, as I've said before, means the law of those who rule. And as we know, it's not us, you or I, Tubanero, who rule anywhere. If that is not the case, if I err in my judgment that the so-called War on Terror is but an extension of America's Indian Wars or Europe's Crusades, then why not let the Chinese army fight ISIS? Why not India, or Brazil, or the South African Armed Forces, or a coalition of all these? You're laughing and blinking at the very idea, because who are these people to be projecting armed force into this region? So what right does Washington have? Well, bluster, sniff, snort. America and the West have strategic interests in the region that must be upheld, etc. Oh yeah? Who says? The people of the region? I think not. The U.S. and the West in general impose themselves and so must maintain this self-serving colonial control to keep that imposition going. Letting other world bodies truly help in dealing with the problems caused by this imperial imposition is therefore counterproductive to the interests of the world community, meaning the interests of the Great White Father and the Great White House of the Great White Tribe of Wall Street and Brussels. So despite a century and more of inclusion and democratization, TR's letter to Chief No Shirt still pretty well sums up the ongoing and unending fundamental attitude of American power toward its subject peoples. I thought it was about time. For that, surprised I got this far. Hello? Why, it's Elihu Root, TR's old Secretary of State, calling from the great White House in the sky. What's that? You think I'm not looking at the larger picture? You'll tell me what you told SCOTUS Chief Judge Oliver Wendell Holmes in 1907, 2 years after Chief No Shirt's trip? That a people can have a country taken away from them by a peaceful invasion like the overrunning of the Roman Empire. So you're saying the U.S. is like Rome, falling because of combined intersystemic rot, as we see in the Great White Father's crumbling old mansion, and the barbarian invasion from south of the border? That it takes more than building a wall. It means smashing these tribes in their own tents is the surest way to keep power at home. And stop the rising tide of color from swamping Western democracy and the rule of law. Well, hey, Mr. Root, we're on the same page after all. It just depends which side.